All right, so AutoTest profiles. So with our AutoTest profiles, this is where we can go in and group a number of AutoTests together. So what we're going to do is we're going to define AutoTest profiles. We're going to re-emphasize, don't delete, deselect, advanced wired profiles, advanced Wi-Fi profiles, air quality profiles, and saving these profile groups. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So in that module 2, we created a couple of quick auto tests just to connect up to the network. But we weren't really interested in doing a lot of testing beyond that, but we wanted to be able to go in and hook up. This module, we're going to look at our auto tests in more depth. So what our profile groups do is they allow us to combine a number of auto tests together and run those in sequence. Why would we want to do that? Let's say that you went in and you were given a fiber, and the person that gave it to you used the S word. We don't like the S word, and this should have all the VLANs on it that you need. How do I know? I can't look at it, really do not look at it, but we can't look at that fiber and say that has the VLANs. So what do? What we do is we create an auto test profile group that tests each one of the VLANs. And I'll show you how we do that. But now I can say, are all the VLANs working? I can add in a couple of different wireless profiles, and I can throw in an air quality profile in there as well. So there's all kinds of cool things we can do. Don't delete, deselect. So as with our community strings, our auto tests are shared amongst multiple profile groups. So you delete a auto test, it deletes it in every profile group where it's referenced. So it reduces the time required to create each one of those. If you create a profile, an auto test for a certain VLAN or a network that requires a static IP, you never have to remember what static IP you're supposed to use on that network again. All you have to do is go ahead and select that profile. So if the auto test is no longer needed in a profile, just deselect it. And if you're absolutely sure you're never going to use that again, then go ahead and delete it. So if we go back and take a look at that wired auto test that we looked at before, if I go into settings, we had native VLAN. Well, what are some of the things that we can change in here? One of the first ones that we can change is PoE. We can run a PoE test, and I just threw up a range of voltages in there that it shows us, hey, here's the voltage ranges that we're looking for. So let's add PoE to our auto test. I come in, go to my auto test. We're going to go to our native VLAN. We are going to go into our settings. So now in this case, I'm going to enable PoE. Let's get rid of that screen right there. We don't need that anymore. So now if I come into PoE test, what we notice is I can come in and turn on PoE. Now, if I just turn on PoE, it's going to measure the voltage. So let's go back. And we're going to hit start. So you see that there's a lightning bolt on there now, and it's going to go out and measure the voltage we're getting from this PoE switch I have right here. So it says we're receiving 43.33 volts. Okay, that's nice. But what if I have an issue as far as resistance on that connection that's going to cause problems? And I've run into this before with things like copper-cladded aluminum wire. It works for Ethernet, but it will not work if we're drawing PoE on it. So what we find is that if we come up here and we go to PoE, this is where I can come in and turn on True Power. Now what True Power does is True Power gives me the ability to not only test the voltage, but I can draw that wattage as well. And this is where I go in and specify the device class. So I can say, this is what I'm expecting. Am I expecting class 4? Am I expecting UPoE? And if I scroll down, we can even test a power injector. I use a lot of MikroTik equipment, and MikroTik comes with a power injector. So if I want to make sure that power injector is working okay, I can look at straight up voltage coming through on pairs and not do my 802.13 3AF or AT. So in this case, I could say, you know what, I want class 3. I'll say OK. So now we'll come back. We'll go back here. Let me just grab something real quick here. I'm going to plug in something right there. And I'm going to come in here. I'm going to hit Start. So we're going to run that same test. This time, we want to make sure we can get our full 13 watts of power. So we connected at 100 meg. That doesn't seem so good. And notice that we failed our PoE. And in fact, what we see is that right here, our true power voltage and our true power was only 5.38 watts and 22.72 volts. That's no good at all. So what this is telling us is that when we did not draw current, we were at 47 volts. But when we did draw current, our voltage dropped down to 22 volts. This would indicate a severe resistance problem on this connection, which is what I put in. I built a test box that has some resistors in there that causes PoE to fail. So I go in, I resolve this problem, I figure out where my issue is. So now I could come back and I could rerun this test. We could see what type of results we get. So being able to identify whether we can provide the PoE that's necessary is something we can build in here. So I can create a profile that tests my PoE and not only test to ensure that the voltage is good, but test to ensure that once I draw a current. So I'm using these thin Ethernet cables. So will they work okay with PoE? Well, in this case, we see that over a 5-foot cable, we're seeing about a 1 volt drop, still within the ranges we're looking for. So PoE passes. This information, if we turn this back on in Link Live, is uploaded to Link Live as well. Okay, so this is where we could go in and we could select our true power and measure PoE. So with Class 8, we will draw up to 71.3 watts at the powered device. So what we may say is that the switch can provide 90 watts, but we do have a voltage drop along the line, which is going to reduce our wattage. So we're looking for, at the most, 71.3 watts out there at the powered device. 802.1x authentication. So the EtherScope supports 802.1x. If we need to use 802.1x to authenticate to our network, we can go in and configure that. Certificates may be imported from the micro SD card. So depending on the type of authentication we're using, we may need to import a certificate. We can put that on the micro SD card and bring that in. Speed and duplex. Rarely do we change this. Typically, we use auto here. However, if I want to make sure my multi-gig switch is actually doing multi-gig, I could do that. So as an example, whoops. Let me grab a long patch cord here. I'm going to go over to my Rack O equipment. I'm going to plug into one of my multi-gig ports. So I'm going to bring this over. And we are going to plug that into our EtherScope nXG. And I'm going to come in here, and we're going to go into our configuration. I'm going to turn off PoE because this particular switch, while it supports up to 10 gig, does not support PoE. So I could say that my wired connection right here, I'm going to go to my speed and duplex. I want to make sure they say that this switch will support 2.5 gigabits per second. But will it really? Well, let's try it. So I'm going to say 2.5 gig. I'll hit OK. We'll come back. And we're going to start that test. Right there. The switch is advertising that it supports 100 gig, not 100 gig, but 100 and gig. It supports 2.55 and 10. So that's what it's advertising. Right here, we see that we connected at 2.5. That's what I wanted to connect at. Now, we get a warning because it says, hey, 2.5 isn't the fastest speed you could have connected. I just wanted to make sure I could connect at that speed. So this is a time where we might go in and force our speed or our duplex. If you're working in an environment where people are setting 100 full, forcing it on the switches, forcing it on devices, this might help you out. Okay, so we'll go back. We'll change that back to auto. Okay. So speed and duplex, we can change that. VLAN tag. This is where we can go in and set up VLAN tagged frames. So if I have a link where I support multiple VLANs, this is where I can go in and set that up. So in this case, I could come in here to VLAN and I could say, I want to enable this particular VLAN. So I could turn that on. I could set my VLAN tag. I could set my priority. So what I'm going to do is we're going to show the rest of this. I'm going to go back and grab a fiber out of the back room, and we will plug into that to validate that. So in this case, we could duplicate an auto test that we created, and then we could change the VLAN tag, save that as another VLAN, duplicate that, save it as another VLAN. So that way, with the push of one button, I can validate all my VLANs at one time on my connection. Okay. The rest of this, pretty straightforward as far as our address. I could come into my IP configuration, say, am I going to use DHCP? And if I am going to use DHCP, what's my threshold on that? Or I can manually enter that information. All of us have networks where we don't have an IP address set up. In fact, nothing really is faster for being able to go in and say, take a piece of equipment that you've got that hasn't been configured yet, but you know what the IP address is that's hard-coded on it. Just go in and set up a static IP address on here real quick. Use the web browser on your EtherScope nXG to connect to that piece of equipment and connect in with that. DNS test. This is where we give the EtherScope a DNS name to look up. And it will go out to the first 2 DNS servers that we get via DHCP, or the 2 that we can specify in the static, and it will check to make sure that we can look those up. So we can specify for our default gateway what our response time timeout is. We can put a custom value in there. So these are just that we're going to ping that default gateway. We want to make sure we get a response back in a reasonable amount of time. Test targets. So I went through those other ones pretty quick. They're pretty self-explanatory, but test targets. We can set up really as many test targets as we want. As part of our auto test, we will go out and test each one of those test targets based on the test type we set up. So if I go into test targets, right now it shows, here's Google. This is another deselect, don't delete. Okay, because these test targets could be used across multiple auto tests. And if you start deleting them, it will delete it in every auto test that is referenced in there. So it's best to unselect that target. So if I tap that action button down there, this allows me to go in and add additional test targets. So I click on that, we see that we can do a ping test, a TCP test, an HTTP test, and an FTP test. So let's go over here. And in this case, We're going to come in. We're connected to our 10 gig connection, or our multi-gig connection. I go to test targets. And we are going to, let's delete this one. I know, I said don't delete. It says it's used in 3 places. And it comes up and tells us, dude, do you really know what you're doing there? In this case, I'm going to select Google. We're going to add some test targets. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say, you know what? I want to do a TCP connectivity test. Now, my email server, I use ports 993 for SMTPS and 465 for IMAPSS. Or I got those backwards, somewhere around in there. So what I'm going to do is to add a TCP test, here is what I want you to do. Always put the device name in first. It will copy the device name to the name field. So it makes it a little bit faster. But if I say secure.email@srvr.com, okay. So I'll say okay. And I can come in here and put the port number in, 993. That is going to make sure that one of the 2 ports I need for my email is going to work. Now, we want to test 465 as well. Do I want to type all that in again? No. All I need to do is come in here and say duplicate. So now there's the device. I can come in. I could say 465. I'll hit OK. And I'll hit back. So now I've added both those. And I could give that a little more descriptive name if I wanted. So now I could hit add, and I could say I want to do an HTTP test. And we could put the URL in. We'll put in NetAlly. I'll say OK. Now, there are all kinds of parameters that we can change in here. Not going to get into that with this particular class, but we could say, hey, that web page must contain, must not contain, how much of the page, how long do we want to allow that to come back? So I'm going to go ahead and put that in. And we'll add one more. And we're going to add a ping test. And I'm going to say 10.0.0.50. That's my IP PBX. I want to make sure I can get to that. And so we could set do not fragment. You could do some cool things in here, like if you change the frame size, make it maximum frame size, and you set don't fragment, let's do that. I say don't fragment. Now this allows me to do things like check my MTU. And if this test starts failing, that can tell me that somebody started messing around with my MTU along the line. All right, so we've added all these test targets. The last one down here, so we go through adding the test targets, duplicating test targets. Be careful, deleting them. HTTP proxy. If you have to go through an HTTP proxy to go out and test these test targets, then you can enter the port number, the IP address, the port number, the authentication information in there to get through that proxy. All right, so let's run that profile. So now we're going to go in, we're going to allow this to connect at 10 gig. So that's connecting to via our copper port, via 10 gig out to our switch. So we got to Google, we got to our email server, we got to NetAlly, we did our ping. Our test comes back and it's all green. We have just validated. We can get to websites we need to get to. We have validated that we could get to our email server. We could get to our IP PBX, just like that. And we can rename this AutoTest to a name that's descriptive of that. Stop using the S word, should. This connection should get you everything you need. Well, shouldn't we be able to prove it? No, there I used the S word too. But we need to be able to prove that it is actually doing what we say it's going to do. This auto test allows us to do that. So now we have run that auto test and we see those results that we get back. Plug in our fiber. We'll hit start. Hey, look at that. We got that link light flashing right there. And we see that we connected at 1 gig. That is excellent. Now, you notice no DHCP. Why? Well, in this case, this fiber link does not have a native VLAN. So what I can do is we see that we've got VLANs. We click on that. It's really neat. It shows me which VLANs I've seen on this connection. So I've seen VLANs 10, 14, and 12. Okay, we can work with that. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in here. We're going to stop. We're going to go to our configure. I'm going to change my VLAN ID. I'm going to set this to 10. Okay. We're going to change the name here. We're going to call this VLAN 10. I like descriptive names. So now I'll come back. We're going to run that again. So can we connect to this fiber link, and is VLAN 10 working? Hot dog. We connected up, and we connected to VLAN 10. We are running 11 tests. That shows us everything is working on VLAN 10. So let's do this. We're going to go back, and we're going to duplicate this profile. So if I come up here, and I go to AutoTest Settings, this is over here in your book, in your PDF file, and I go to VLAN 10, and I say duplicate. Now I have a copy of VLAN 10. This has all my test targets in it. So now I could say VLAN 12. Okay. And we're going to change our VLAN tag to 12. See how easy that is to create 2 of our profiles that have all the same test targets, looking for all that same information, but now they're using 2 different VLAN tags. So now I've got VLAN, I'm going to turn off my air quality for just a moment. I've got VLAN 10, 12. Let's duplicate 12. We're going to call that VLAN 14. All right. So now my AutoTest profile group has 3 of these different profile tests in here. So now watch this. If I hit start, it is going to go out and connect to VLAN 10 and check to see if I can get the connectivity I expect for that. When that one's done, it's going to do VLAN 12. When that one's done, it's going to do VLAN 14. So now, instead of going in and running a test and changing the VLAN tag and running a test and changing the VLAN tag, I can come in and create this profile group that tests all my VLANs with the push of one button. So I'm getting emails that are saying, hey, your test results have been uploaded. I could reply to those with a comment. So VLAN 12 is running. Let's see what's going on with VLAN 12. So VLAN 12 is my guest network. So in that case, I expect that we could get out to the internet, but we will not be able to get to my phone server. Okay, so that failed. That's actually okay. So what I would do in this case is I would change the test targets for VLAN 12 and remove the IPPBX. I want to make sure these pass, if that's what I expect out of it. So we'll let VLAN 14 run. Now, on this one page, we can see VLAN 14 works, 12 failed, 10. So let's go in. We'll make a quick change. We're going to edit 12. We're going to go to our test targets. And we're going to uncheck this one. We are not going to delete it. We're just going to uncheck it. We could run that one more time. We'll let that run in the background. So this is where we can start duplicating profiles and put those together into our profile group. So we'll let that one run, make sure that that worked okay. We got an IP address, got to our default gateway, got to Google, got to our email server. Boom. We are good. All three are green. This is how easy it is to create these profiles where we can connect to multiple VLANs, your voice VLAN, your data VLAN, and validate that it's working. Then we have uploaded those test results to Link Live. You now have validation that those are working okay. So if it comes back and it's not working again, somebody says, hey, this isn't working, you can go back and see if it worked or not. Now, adding a Wi-Fi auto test. Let's come in here and, well, let's do this. We're going to go to our AutoTest Settings. We're going to add back in our OfficeNet. Okay. So, for the most part, excuse me, for the most part, we did everything we would typically need to do to configure up the wireless. There are a couple of other things that we can go into and change on our configuration, and that is our channel thresholds. So with our channel thresholds, this is where I can go in and I can set my 802.11 utilization and my non-802.11 utilization. Okay. So in this case, non-802.11 or 802.11 is 802.11 traffic. Non-802.11 could be adjacent channel interference, or it could be an interfering device such as a microwave, a wireless camera, microphone, or any other 2.4 or 5 gigahertz device that could be interfering with your network. So in this case, I can set these thresholds. I can say, look, if I see over 25% utilization, that's going to be a warning. So I can set those utilization thresholds in there. The other thing I can do on my Wi-Fi profile is add test targets. So we're going to say we want to be able to get to Google. See how we've added those test targets, and it is so easy now just to check on those. We don't have to go in and recreate each one of those. So now there's my OfficeNet. And we're going to add one more. I'm going to duplicate OfficeNet. And we are going to come in and we're going to call this GuestNet. We're going to connect to PR Guest. Yeah, there's my passphrase. It's really tricky. And I'm going to go into test targets. And because on my guest network, I can't get to that device right there, we're going to uncheck that. All right. So now we have added tests for our 3 VLANs. We've added a test to check and make sure our office network is working okay, that our guest network is working okay. So the last one we're going to add in is air quality. So we're going to come in here. We're going to go into air quality. We'll add that profile in. We'll click on that profile. We'll go into the configuration. So now, for our air quality profile, we can set a threshold on 802.11 utilization, non-802.11 utilization, co-channel interference. So in this case, what we're saying is that if we see 4 APs on our channel, we're going to issue a warning. If we see 8 APs on our channel, we're going to say it's a failure. However, down there at the bottom, our co-channel interference AP signal level. What that's doing is that, we'll get down into here, what that's doing is that's saying if that signal is less than -75, we're not going to count that AP. So we're only really concerned with APs that have a particular signal strength. Now I can adjust that. So I can say, I only care about APs that are -70 or better, or -65. Really depends on what you're looking for in your environment. Okay. So we'll go back. So here we go. We're going to hit start. So this is the big test. We are testing our VLANs. We're testing our office wireless. We're testing our office guest wireless, and we're checking our air quality. We're doing that with one push of a button. So once you create this profile group, I'm going to show you how we can save this. You never have to recreate all this again. And what you're doing is you're using profiles that you've already created. And as you create more and more of those profiles, you can then just start assembling profiles into a group. So now when you walk into an environment, you can very quickly go in and see what's going on out there. Okay. So just, well, that's running. A couple questions that have come in. They said, AutoTest says nearest switch not found, but Discovery finds the switch. What's happening here? So in that case, what's happening is that that switch may not be sending out CDP or LLDP. And so what AutoTest is looking for is CDP or LLDP. Now, with those, if we have both CDP and LLDP in our environment, we may see a nearest switch that doesn't make any sense. For example, I've got a Cisco IP phone on my network, which sends out CDP. If the EtherScope sees that CDP frame before it sees the LLDP, it'll say my nearest switch is my phone. So you'll notice that there's a refresh in there. But one thing that could be happening in that situation is that, for security reasons, somebody's turned off one of those link layer discovery protocols. And as a result, we're not getting that nearest switch coming out there. So typically what we're looking for with the nearest switch is that link layer discovery protocol packet. So that could explain why you would not be seeing nearest switch when you ran AutoTest, but possibly if you go out to discovery and you find your device in discovery, you would see the nearest switch in that case. All right. Lots of comments on how I could get VNC to display right. And we're almost there. So we have successfully connected to our wireless networks. We've successfully connected to our VLANs. Our air quality looks good. In fact, let's expand air quality. And it tells me that on channel 11, I have 3 APs. Channel 6, 1 AP. Channel 12, nothing. That's good. Channel 12, it shows me we've got some non-802.11 out there on channel 12. It shows me my co-channel interference. We could take a look and see what's going on with my 5 gig. We can even start coming in and looking at our channels map and really digging into our wireless there. But there's our air quality report for that. Our guest network, it shows us that we connected. It tells us what AP or what BSS ID we connected to, our IP address, our channel information in there as far as 802.11 and non-802.11 that we saw out there. So we have now validated that we could successfully connect to all the networks we need to connect to. I don't want to lose this information in here. So here we've got our test that we ran. So what do? Well, I go into my profile group by going into my AutoTest settings. And up here at the top, I have a save. I can hit save as. I'll call it the whole network. We can give it whatever name we want there. Now, if I came in here, I said load. Well, I only have the whole network. So let's do this. I'm going to uncheck everything. We're going to switch back to our copper connection. We're going to add a wired profile. I'm just going to call it native VLAN. Really basic test here. So now I could come up, go to my AutoTest settings, and say save as. So I'll save that as native VLAN. So now I've got my native VLAN profile. I just want to come out, see real quick, could I connect to that connection? There we go. We connected a gig. It worked. Simple. Now, I come over here. I swap to my fiber. I want to test that. I go to AutoTest Settings. Load the whole network. I go back, and now I can hit start. That's all it took to create a profile like that. It took a little bit of work, but now that you've created it, you don't have to go back and create that again. You can save that profile group. I'm going to turn off the screen share because I really want to emphasize this point. And that is that we could get into really the weeds as far as the settings on the EtherScope. But what is so important when it comes to the EtherScope is creating workflows. And so one of the workflows that we can create in a situation like this is what resources do we need for everything to work properly? Do we need PoE? Do we need a DHCP address? Do we need to be able to get to our default gateway and resolve a DNS name? Yeah, pretty much in every case we do. But what servers do we depend on? And this is where we could go in and do a packet capture, and we could take a look at which devices is a specific host connecting to. What database servers is it connecting to? What resources is it using? Once we know those resources, we then can create targets. Those targets could be a ping, they could be a TCP connection, or they could be an HTTP GET. Once we put those targets in there, we have now created a profile that represents an application. So now, if you go out and test something, you can test to make sure that application works well. My Comcast internet connection here, it was rebooting every once in a while. We're losing connectivity. That's not good when I'm doing webcasts like this. So I had the technician come out, and he measured what the signal was coming into my office. They ended up replacing the modem because I had a really old modem. But we worked out, we had a bad splitter, replaced the splitter. I like it when somebody comes out and takes measurements to ensure that I'm getting the best connection possible. Your clients like that too. So if you can go in and use this to do those measurements and go back and show them that things are working properly and be able to document that, they're going to like that, because now I could go in and say, we could go back to Link Live. We could go to the Bootcamp December folder. We could take all those test results and put those into a report and say, here's a report of the testing that we did. What this does is this reduces the number of callbacks. You don't have to come, you're less likely to have to come back out because you didn't use the S word. You validated it was working properly. Once you create that profile and you know that you have a profile that works, if you go out and run it again and any of those things fail, now you know exactly what failed, because the term I hate the most, the network is down. Really? How do you know the network is down? Well, I can't get to this. And they start asking questions, you start digging in deeper and finding out what's really going on. But by creating a profile like this, you are able to get an idea very quickly of what's working, what's not working. That significantly reduces the amount of time it takes for you to get to the root of what the problem is.